Good afternoon, and it is an honor for me to welcome you to this next panel. We have a wonderful, esteemed panel here with me today, and we have Amina Razvi, James Schaefer, and Andrea Kennedy. So we couldn't have a better backdrop, really, for this panel. We're in the center of the fashion capital of the world and on the heels of New York Fashion Week. But amidst all that glamour, the apparel sector has some serious challenges. So we have today's panel to unpack some of those challenges and provide some solutions. Before I turn it over to the panel, I would like to share some really astonishing facts about the state of fashion and the apparel industry that really highlight the need for this collective action, which is the topic of this panel, and the sorts of efforts undertaken by our panelists on a daily basis. So the facts that I'm going to share with you are from a recent report from a large insurance company. So the fashion industry produces about 10% of the annual global carbon emissions. So that's more than maritime shipping and international flights combined. So that's a staggering amount. The fashion's emissions of greenhouse gases are projected to grow by 50% by 2030. And the fashion sector uses about 93 billion cubic meters of water annually, and that's about 4% of freshwater withdrawal. So these are truly staggering statistics, and in addition to this backdrop of these operational challenges for the industry, there are also other kinds of pressures that are mounting that are drivers where we need collective action. And let me just name a few. We have regulation and reporting in this space, and that includes not just emissions, but nature. And this is from all angles. We have CSRD from Europe, SEC brewing here in the US, shortly to be released, California rulings. We also have litigation risks, potential for activities of today from companies being potential liabilities of the future, potential carbon tax, a consumer base that's changing in their preferences and behaviors. So these are some of the headwinds that are with us today that are known to us, and actually there's a lot of unknown unknowns as well in the future. So now I'd like to move over to our panelists. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us how your organizations are tackling some of these challenges? So can we start with you, Amina? I'm sorry.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here, and obviously this conversation couldn't be more timely. So I am the CEO of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and we are a global multi-stakeholder nonprofit alliance that works with almost 50% of the industry across 30 plus countries. We have over 280 members, and they represent every part of the value chain. So brands, retailers, manufacturers, NGOs, academics, and others. We've been working together over the past 10 years to really transform business for exponential impact. And the way that we've done that is through our core set of tools called the Higg Index. And the Higg Index is a suite of 5 tools that actually measures social and environmental impact across the value chain. So it really asks businesses to look at all of the impacts and some of the issues and the challenges that you've just mentioned, Michelle, across every part of the value chain. So from the materials that they use in their products to how those products are actually manufactured, to brand processes and management systems. And that is really critically important for companies to be able to understand not only what their impacts are, but then to actually be able to address them. So we've been working on these issues for a decade plus, and our members have aligned on how they not only leverage these tools and scale them, but ultimately now how we actually use the data and the insights from those tools to drive collective action and improvement.
Thank you, Amina. James?
Thank you, Michelle. It's great to be here. I'm James Schaefer. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Worldly. Worldly is a partner organization with the SAC, so it's great to have Amina's tee up. We are the leading impact intelligence platform for organizations today in the apparel and textile industry, and we're expanding rapidly to other industries. In short, we help companies take a very close look at their environmental and social activities, both inherent to their products, in their operations, in their materials, and most importantly, in their manufacturing. Michelle, as I was getting ready for this conversation and certainly this intro, I thought, what could I tell this group about why I'm excited to do this work? And it was an opportune moment to be very vulnerable and honest with the audience. I'm coming up on a milestone birthday of sorts, and it's really led to a lot of reflection, pondering the stars and looking in the mirror and thinking about childhood and things like that. And so I did what any normal person would do when thinking about the year of their birth. I asked ChatGPT. What were the important things happening in 1974, and I was immediately had my feelings hurt. I feel like ChatGPT and I have become close, to be honest. And it did not mention my birthday itself. It instead mentioned a lot of different things, some of which pertain to Richard Nixon. But one thing stood out. It said that in 1974, that was the advent of the 55 mile per hour nationally enforced speed limit. I had kind of forgotten about that. It seems sort of ridiculous and silly. The point of it, and some of you in the room may remember this, is we were trying to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels because just the prior year, OPEC had exposed just how fragile we were as a society in terms of our addiction to fossil fuels for our big V8 engines back in the day, and they had embargoed the sale to the United States and similar countries, and it really, really hurt, or so my parents tell me. And so we instituted the speed limit because we thought it would reduce consumption. It did not really work. The retrospective analysis shows less than a 1% decrease in consumption. Come to find out, to accelerate a big V8 engine from 50 to 55 doesn't save a whole lot of gas from 60 to 65. So it did save a lot of lives because we reduced speeds, and it drove some local jurisdiction speed ticket revenue, which is a dubious result. But it really connected to me, like, I am so excited to be doing this work today, because even in this room, certainly my esteemed colleagues on the panel here, but in this room, individuals who have attended this event are doing such strategic work that I think is pointed right at the climate crisis. And I can't believe I get to be a part of it. We'll talk more about Worldly. We'll talk about the role of academia, talk about the role of convening organizations like Sustainable Apparel Coalition. But I jump out of bed every morning because I can't believe I live in this moment of time. 50 years from today, I think that our descendants or kids or what have you will look at this era like we look at the Industrial Revolution or maybe the birth of the internet. This is when change happened, and I feel really privileged to be a part of it. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. That was very inspirational. Andrea.
I don't have a funny story, but I get out of bed every morning for the same reason. I'm very optimistic. So I am the lead faculty and chair of fashion merchandising and management at Berkeley College. Berkeley College is a college in Midtown Manhattan and has several campuses in New Jersey, and we have a fashion program, and I've been hired to rethink it and make sure that we are graduating students who are climate conscious, system thinkers, who really are working towards a fossil-free future of fashion. And we're doing that in all types of ways, including collaborating with organizations and platforms and tools and fashion brands and whatnot, and really just trying to make our students prepared to enter companies where sometimes they have been continuing business as usual because that's the way that's been successful for them for a long time. And I think that just as it's an exciting time in fashion and in the world, that it is also in academia, because academia is slow to change, and suddenly I feel that our college and colleges throughout the US at least are all trying to change, and rapidly so.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be able to bring in the students to this conversation, so thank you for bringing that perspective.
Sure, and they're here.
Amina, I want to start with you. Maybe if we could go back to some of the statistics that I shared earlier at the start. So where do you see the industry going? I mean, in terms, does that resonate with you in terms of the targets and particularly around the decarbonization? I know there are lots of targets. If you could start with us, start with that on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what's interesting, I think James brings up a really good point, but like when we talk about how the SAC was founded, it was founded almost 13 years ago when two very unlikely partners, Patagonia and Walmart, actually brought the industry together from a pre-collaborative standpoint. And at that point, the industry was at a bit of an inflection point. You had companies actually with their own tools, their own proprietary assessments, their own programs, all working in silos, right? And all trying to actually deal with some of the same issues around social and environmental impact across the industry, and yet feeling like they weren't really making a lot of progress. And so the SAC was formed. They brought value chain partners together. They said, we need to not only collaborate from a pre-competitive standpoint and collaborate deeply, but we also actually need to make sure we're talking about the same thing, that we're developing tools that look at impacts from an apples to apples perspective, right? And we've spent a decade doing that, and I think a lot of really good work has been done where companies have been able to get together, they have been able to align on standards, they have been able to actually leverage them to address some of the issues and the challenges that you rightly bring up. What I do find interesting as I reflect on the SAC's journey is I think the industry is, again, at a very critical inflection point now, in that we find ourselves almost having a somewhat similar but slightly different conversation where we have made progress and yet it is not enough, and we are not moving fast enough, and we are not collaborating enough or as deeply as we can and we need to be to solve some of these challenges, right? And that's where I find we have such an incredible opportunity, as James also talks about, is, with not only all the great work that has been done, but just, I think, all the experience and the expertise that we find not only within our industry, but cross-sectorally, for us to actually leverage this insight and this knowledge that we all have to drive momentum forward. And that's what's exciting for me, but I also think that, to your point, the industry does need to move faster, right? We do need to make sure that companies are measuring and assessing their impact. They do need to be actually figuring out how they work across the supply chain, how they work, brands and retailers, with their manufacturers to address issues of not only carbon, but water, chemicals management, and social labor issues, right? So it's kind of unfortunately, it's like an all of the above strategy where companies really need to be doubling down on assessing their impact. They need to be doubling down on how they work together, and they need to be part of coalitions like ours and other partnerships that ultimately will help them and the industry move the needle.
Yeah, very important. And I want to get to the industry. We often hear that the industry is very fragmented, long supply chains, lack of standards. James, can you comment on that? I know that's probably one of your favorite topics, right?
That's a perfect setup, Michelle, because I think to understand worldly, the best way to do that is to understand that we are in the midst of a major transition. And I would simplify it by saying we are transitioning from the era of voluntary reporting on your particular management activities and the positive results of those to an era of regulation. It's sort of from carrot to stick, and it is really serious business. And the companies such as brands, retailers, and manufacturers whom we serve in our platform, they're really on the hot seat. And it's sort of like right now. I don't think the point of our panel today is to do an excruciating discussion of all the details of the various regulatory frameworks that are becoming a reality overnight. But the bottom line is that companies who in the past who have either been sort of head in the sand or who have been doing some voluntary reporting, which is great, are now going to be required in big commercial jurisdictions, certainly Europe. We all know about that, but I hope many of us in the room have read the recent California regulations that will very likely be signed into law in a matter of days. These all boil down to things like know your supply chain, understand the different categories of risk that are inherent to that supply chain, demonstrate that you're mitigating those risks, and then report on your progress on a at least year-over-year basis. Now consider this, many of the companies that need our help, of course, are still mapping their supply chain. They may know a few of their key strategic suppliers, but they certainly can't go down a tier into those suppliers. Even a perfunctory reading of these regulations, like I said, it really sobers you up. For instance, in Europe, over the course of the next year, it's something like 10,000 companies. And these are not all mega enterprises. Some of these are fairly small companies are going to be on the hook to report these types of things. So we could go on, but to tell you a little bit about our company, I would just say enter Worldly. This is what we're focused on. And it's a tall order because, as Amina pointed out, as you pointed out, Michelle, as well, this is an incredibly fragmented supply chain. So we deliver a suite of tools, part of which, I would say the keystone of which is the Higg Index, developed by industry itself with the help of civil society to help organizations get really high resolution primary data on a lot of things, but I want to really emphasize on the act of manufacturing at multiple tiers of the supply chain. And it's with that data, first of all, that you're able to baseline where you are, and then thanks to some of the analytics and insights and recommendations we're able to deliver through our platform, you actually make a plan. Now connect that back to what the regulations are asking for. You actually have to show that you have a plan, that you're executing that plan, and then you have to report on the results of that plan. So that's where Worldly enters with a suite of tools, part of which are the Higg Index, which are true industry-leading assessment tools. And we're just really excited about the future. We have, I think, something like 25,000 companies on platform today, but we actually think of this as day one. We're seeking maybe $1 trillion supply chain transformation. We don't think any of it's possible without high resolution data. So that's the role we try to play in the supply chain.
Okay, thank you. So we've heard from Amina, who represents with the SAC major businesses working technology from James. Andrea, can you give us some insight into what's the role of academia? How can academia really make a difference across this partnership?
So academia can prepare students to learn the ways to reduce all the impacts that you started us off and kicked us off with by reading, by partnering together, really. So I can tell you that being a partner with there are many organizations, but Sustainable Apparel Coalition is an example since we're together. They have a community hub where I was able to reach out and find fashion brands, large global retailers with hundreds of stores, and that said, we'll have your students work on a project, because all I did was write on the hub, anyone have a problem to solve? I have students who will be your green teams through a semester. And they did it. And using Higg Index from Worldly, we're able to help them measure those impacts with their LCA software, the MSI and the PM, the product module. MSI is Material Sustainability Index. And create those roadmaps and paths. And open eyes and then say, with these, this is what we've learned from assessing this, and here are ways that we suggest to change it. Our students have created plans to roll sweaters in a different way, so more can be packed in a shipment and less shipments come, and then have been able to say, here was what all those plastic bags were, and here, if you do this, this is what it will be, and we've sourced them for you at 5 cents each, and here it is. And these are really great tools that students can learn, get real life feedback live from a brand, and that's really learning by doing, and that's something you can't Google. And that's what I think really academia is doing now, is trying to change by partnering, and we've done it successfully so, and we'll continue to do that. And I think that it's an exciting time, because students can be the ones that go in their internships and for sure in their first jobs, as the ones with their fists up working toward a just and equitable and sustainable future. And it's brands, when I speak to them, especially HR teams, what is it you're looking for with entry-level fashion positions? They have a few requests, but one of them is understanding sustainability and having knowledge of those solutions, because everyone on their team does not. Some do, but often it's a team of 1 or 2. So academia has a huge opportunity right now.
Okay, that's very encouraging to hear. I want to just keep the partnership discussion going, because I'm very envious of the massive membership that you have there at the SAC. Can you give us some insights into the trends that you're seeing across the industry?
With regards to partnership?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, for us, we look at partnership in a couple of different ways. There's how the SAC actually brings this entire community together, convenes the industry, and partners within the membership itself, right? So, you know, one is on the development of the tools, which have been a decade in the making, and I can tell you my team and I don't sit, you know, kind of behind the scenes and make these tools. We actually leverage the industry knowledge base and expertise. We leverage academia, we leverage, you know, stakeholders, et cetera, to really actually develop these tools and evolve the tools so that the tools are fit for purpose, right? They are tools developed by the industry for the industry to assess and understand their impacts. And that's a level of partnership that happens kind of within this community of the SAC. We take it a step further and we look at partnerships with strategic partners like Worldly or with Textile Exchange or ZDHC, and how these are organizations that operate within the ecosystem. We take a look at academia that are absolutely critical to not only actually implementing the tools and implementing this work, but also to innovation and how things need to evolve, whether it's looking at manufacturing processes, materials, whether it's looking at, you know, how things are packed, things like that. So there's this next layer of how we partner with others within the ecosystem, within the industry to really drive tangible change. And then there's how we actually partner kind of across sectors and across industry. Just last week, our team was in Hong Kong at Rethink Hong Kong, where we convened a workshop of 60 plus industry representatives from across multiple sectors. And that was to really understand how to address the issue of decarbonization, not just within our sector, but across sectors and across the supply chain. And that's because we are not the only industry that is trying to do this and needs to do this, right? Ultimately, every sector needs to decarbonize. And so those types of partnerships and engagement are critically important because that is where we can not only learn from other sectors in terms of what they're doing, but we can bring all of this great work that we believe that we've done within our industry forward to actually figure out how we move the needle and help other sectors as well. And so for us, I talk a lot about how I believe partnership is the new leadership. My team, I say it so much, my team is probably sick of it at this point, but that's because we do believe that that is so critical. We are not going to solve the climate crisis. We are not going to solve, you know, a just and equitable transition without ultimately partnering, not just beyond the walls of a company, but beyond the walls of our sector. And so that to us is absolutely critical, and we believe that is how we're going to tackle some of those big issues you talked about at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, James, the metrics part, I would just want to go back to that. So how essential do you think metrics are in helping us move this and make progress across all of the partnerships and the work that you're doing?
Oh, I think it's critically important. I feel like if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And unfortunately, rhetoric, we're humans, we like rhetoric, we like story, and sometimes that starts to obfuscate what the facts of the matter are. I'd like to talk a little bit today about what are the facts of where carbon lives in the supply chain. I don't think many people really know, but by using tools such as the facility environmental module, which I think is maybe the keystone output of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition's interesting approach to convening all actors in a supply chain, and which is available on our platform to tens of thousands of factories, that enables a brand or retailer to actually get a really high resolution look in various impact areas like carbon, chemistry, energy, wastewater, et cetera. Where is this factory today in terms of its environmental footprint? You know, I would say that so much attention in story and in the media is about fill in the blank big company has gone fully remote and it's all Zoom and they saved this much carbon. It reminds me of the 80s when some airline removed an olive from their salads, and it was like one of the first green stories, quote unquote. That is nonsense. The carbon lives deep in the supply chain. And so, of course, you need to be able to have the relationship, and organizations who convene, like the SAC, help you with that. But then you have to have a very usable tool that gets right at the metrics of energy consumption, emissions, water, et cetera. So I actually don't think it's something we can meet the challenge without. It's absolutely essential. In terms of, you know, how we parlay that into partnership, I think it segues into that discussion a bit. I think that there are a few essential ingredients to mega scale impact. Like think about big consumer products, value chains. Just in apparel and textile, it's probably a $2 trillion business. So how do you convert practices and, you know, for instance, break the addiction to fossil fuel as a source of energy? I think there's three ingredients. You have to get the industry together, which is really hard work. You have competitors sitting next to each other. You have buyers and sellers. Sometimes you're dealing with relationship dynamics that go back a couple of centuries, quite literally. And I think organizations like SAC do an incredible job with that. But you also have to have technology. You can't just, draw your tool on a whiteboard or put it in Excel or what have you, and that's where Worldly plays a role in our partnerships with SAC and other organizations, is that we're able to capitalize, deliver the right business model, provision, think about data extensibility so that data can go into business systems for big companies. These are complicated issues. Nonprofits should probably not be working on that. But there's a third leg to the stool, and that is civil society. And so these are scientific organizations, academia, government and non-governmental organizations who, of course, we can learn from, but to put it more bluntly, can vet our work. So I think we ought to be cautious about pure software plays who are trying to calculate carbon. I support it. I'm an entrepreneur at heart, but make sure that you're working with organizations that have that backbone of credibility, which again is the ability to be from industry and deep in the issues, the ability to actually deliver technology and the metrics that you're referring to, and the ability to be credible. And that is, what is these organizations' partnerships with civil society?
And so metrics sounds like a very much a business-focused term. Is that something that you think about with you and your students?
The metrics?
Yes, this is overall sustainability metrics. Does that factor into your
It absolutely factors in as one of the many things that need to factor in when you're teaching for sustainability. But yes, metrics does give you a benchmark, and then you can compare an existing product with a future product or two existing products, et cetera. In terms of academia, though, I just want to get back to that. I did a study a couple of years ago on drivers and barriers to education for fashion sustainability at American colleges and universities. And so many large colleges in New York and LA and in the middle of the country told me the barriers were either cost, or the faculty didn't have that knowledge, or the board of trustees was giving other priorities. Maybe they had a DEI priority that they had to satisfy or whatnot. And there was just so many that education for sustainability, just as much as it was passionate to their students for sure, and some of the faculty, they weren't able to do it. And it was so interesting. This was only 3 years ago that I completed it. But what I say to the educators are out there are, regardless of all of those reasons, we need to really educate ourselves first and put our own air mask on before helping others, right? And the only way we're going to do that, if we're not getting the degrees in environmental sustainability and education for sustainability and whatnot, is by partnering with other organizations and learning together and discovering together. And I feel that in every instance that has occurred, it's been successful. And I speak to a lot of educators in the fashion space, and we've worked together, myself and other schools, in kind of creating a module so that students learn what questions to ask when sourcing textiles. In a product development class, what to specify on a tech pack, that the seams should be bound, the stitches should be smaller, so that you're creating a product with better longevity and all kinds of other issues. But it can be put into every single course, which is what we're certainly doing, and that I suggest everyone do, because a lot of companies are changing, but many are still, as I've already said, operating the same way with business as usual. And here's the opportunity to really make students go in and be those sustainable advocates. So I don't know if I answered your question about metrics.
Yeah, that's very exciting to hear about the focus of sustainability in the overall design and the curriculum. You told me earlier about how there's a distinction between the style and then the work that you're doing. Can you share with the audience a little bit more about how in fashion there's the design component, but then your merchandising and a little bit of separation? I think that would be interesting.
So the program that I'm running is not a design program, it's a merchandising and management program. So our students really are learning how to source, how to be buyers and planners and allocators, but they also want to be stylists and fashion show producers and whatnot. But all of those need sustainable thinking for sure. And we are teaching, though, all of the strategies and elements of circularity and how to get there. So even if they are not illustrating on a model and pattern making, they are learning the ways to design for energy efficiency so that a garment perhaps could be washed less by the consumer, you know, and therefore there's less embedded carbon by the time it gets to its end of use. Ways to work towards circularity after end of use in terms of all of the different chemical and mechanical recycling, in terms of disassembly and ways to do that, and how to design so that that can be done. How to work towards multiple sizing for one garment so that people don't have to buy something, they have an emotional connection to that garment because it fits me when I gain or lose or whatnot, so I love it more. And helping them understand all those strategies so that, you know, so even if you're not a designer, you still need to understand the methods and ways to think about infusing all of that into your products.
Thank you for sharing this. Super interesting. Amina, can you add on to that in terms of what you're saying in your coalition, in terms of approaches?
Yeah, so I mean, what I will say is that when we talk about how our members are actually working together to, you know, drive impact and decarbonization, there's a couple of ways. So number one, and James hit on it a little bit, we're launching the revised HIG facility environmental module this November. And this is leaps and bounds ahead of like where, you know, like we were a couple of years ago. It's been 2 years in the making. It's gone through extensive review, consultation, stakeholder engagement. It's, you know, thousands of pieces of feedback. But ultimately, all of that is being leveraged to drive improvement not only with the tool, but ultimately to help the industry move forward and advance on their decarbonization efforts, right? So with this tool, companies will be able to have, as James has talked about, better data accuracy. It's also aligned with the greenhouse gas protocol. So that means that any company who has set a science-based target, which all of the SAC members are required to do, so brands, retailers, and manufacturers who are part of the SAC are actually required to set a science-based target. These are the types of tools that will help them. You know, from our standpoint, it is not enough to just supply really great tools. It is really important to actually be able to help support companies on how they leverage those tools to achieve their goals, right? So at the end of the day, having a great tool is one thing, but making sure that companies understand how to use those tools, how to take the data and the insights from those tools, and not only help them improve within their company, but also actually help them work across their supply chain to improve reduction in emissions and actually move the industry in that shift towards decarbonization is critically important. We've also been doing projects where we are starting to leverage the data and the insights more carefully. So we recently did a project where we looked at about 1,500 facilities, and of the facilities we looked at, those facilities actually represented about 78% of the emissions within this kind of pool. And so when you look at that and you look at how valuable not just the tools are, not just the act of like measuring your emissions, but also how you leverage those insights at scale, it becomes really powerful. When we looked at the modeling, we found that if you addressed those 1,500 facilities and you were able to implement various measures, whether it's, you know, moving away from coal, energy efficiency, et cetera, you could reduce emissions by almost 35% by 2030, right? That's incredible. And like that is how we need companies to not only be assessing their impact, but also leveraging the tools and the data and the insight to help them drive action, not only individually, but ultimately collectively, because this is a collective endeavor. And again, back to the question around partnerships and what it's gonna take. It's gonna take great data, it's gonna take partnerships, and it's going to take companies working hand in hand to address these issues.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to pick up on scale, because I think that's really important. James, can you comment on the kinds of metrics, indexes, and how they're going to contribute to scaling?
Well, let me take this angle on it because I also want to build on what Amina was talking about. We're obviously very excited about the facility environmental module, massive upgrade. This is the gold standard of factory assessment, I think, in multiple industries. But a tool in itself is not going to solve our climate crisis. It's really about where it's applied, where it's implemented, and what you do with the data that comes from it. And this is the metric I want to get at. This is a scale metric that we can all engage with. We've all heard that Scope 3 is the problem. Whether many of us know exactly what's included in Scope 3 or not, it's a different panel for a different time. But we've heard many times that 90% of our carbon problem lives in Scope 3, and that's really scary because it's generally the things you don't directly control if you're a brand or a retailer or that sort of consumer products company. But if you look at large-scale industry metrics, where does more than half of that 90% live? In the apparel industry, which I think is a handy reference since we're all wearing clothing today, it lives in material processing and production. What that means in layman's terms is all the work that goes into the material to get it ready for final assembly. Final assembly is what we would call tier 1 in our businesses. Think about sewing machines, right? That's tier 1. Below that is tier 2 and tier 3, and then down to tier 4, which is raw material extraction, farms. But in other words, the biggest block of carbon lives at tier 2 and below. Well, Worldly has a unique viewpoint because we can see all the data everybody's collecting. Guess where they're collecting it? By like 80+%. Tier 1, it's not where the carbon is. Okay, so we need to understand where the carbon is in terms of Scope 3, and we need to apply our tool and our data collection and our analysis that shows us how to make changes in those hotspots like Amina was mentioning. So I think even really basic, Michelle, we have to understand these major climate metrics and what they tell us about where to apply the tools.
Thank you. I think that's so important. Having that insight across Scope 1, 2, and 3, and it's especially Scope 3, it's very subtle. So is that something you work with, Andrea?
And it is the most eye-opening thing when students identify these hotspots using HIG on their own. First in the MSI, the Material Sustainability Index, they will have a fabric and try and first map it, and then when you click down and you have all of the LCA life cycle areas of the fabric, and then they see the embedded carbon in a meter or a kilo of that fabric, right? And the water consumption or the embedded water, how much chemicals, fossil fuel depletion, et cetera. But then they'll look at each of that through the life cycle stages, and they're like, wow, most of it, 80% of it is in tier 4, that raw material. So what happens when you swap that and change that polyester from virgin to recycled? Oh, it's a lot less. So now they're starting to understand, using those metrics, where they should source and where those solutions come from. Another thing, and I know we chatted about this in our pre-meeting, that I think using the HIG tools is so eye-opening for students is in the FSLM. We're talking a lot about carbon and greenhouse gases at this conference, but the FSLM is the Facility, Social, and Labor module. Did I get that right?
You got it.
Yeah. And when students explore that, I say nothing. Here, this is it, go in. And the next thing you know, they're like, wow, you see female students getting pissed off because the questions are asking them, do you require a virginity test for all your female workers when they're hired, for factories and whatnot? And they start realizing these global issues that affect women and girls in countries that they haven't seen, but that they didn't even know that this was an issue. And so I think that just getting people to really understand all the interconnected crises that are connected to consumer products, including fashion, is not only does it measure these impacts and you can create measurable ways to change socially and environmentally, but also it's just eye-opening and educational itself to explore the HIG tools.
Well, sounds like a phenomenal program.
All the more reason to join.
Yes, I think I want to be a student in your program. Well, in the interest of time, I want to give the panelists a final lightning round. So if you could please conclude, give us a concluding thought on the call for action. So start with you, Amina.
Sure. So for me, it's really that, I think James mentioned it as well, but we say this a lot, is you can't manage what you don't measure. So, my call to action, sorry, James, if I took yours, but is that companies out there have to be measuring their impact, like full stop. And if you haven't started doing it, you are already behind for all the reasons that not only have we talked about on this panel, but impending regulation, being able to address multiple crises from environmental to social, et cetera. Like, you cannot understand what your impact is if you are not measuring it and you're not leveraging those data and the insights to drive real change within your business, right? So at this point in time, it really requires that companies have an all of the above strategy. It is not enough, I think, as Andrea rightly pointed out, to just focus on carbon, because that is one issue. We have to look at the social labor aspect of this well and ensure that as we are decarbonizing as an industry, we're looking at what a just transition means and what that looks like and the impacts of that, right? But all of that really starts with making sure that you understand as a business what your impacts are, and then actually developing those strategies for how you're going to address it, and importantly, working with others across the value chain. So working with your manufacturers, working with other brands and retailers to really address these issues not only holistically, but in partnership with each other collectively.
Thank you.
She kind of stole the whole thing, honestly.
Sorry, James.
Kidding aside, listen, I think we've had a couple decades of consumer products companies and the individuals who work inside of them wanting to meaningfully contribute. I think it's a ruse to think that all corporations are evil empires. It's not true. I work with these individuals every day. They're good-hearted people. And I hope companies are doing that on an ethical basis, but it's getting really serious. Whether you're feeling ethical or not, you are going to be legally required to demonstrate to society in whatever your commercial jurisdiction is that you understand the risks and you're taking action to mitigate and you're showing everybody your progress over time. So my call to action is that your company's environmental and social impact is not in how you run your cafeteria. It's really not in your light bulbs. I suggest changing these. They're blinding. As good as those things are, it's deep inside of your supply chain, and that is a real active will to understand your suppliers and truly partner with them. Don't show up with your clipboard. Partner with your suppliers and their suppliers and create a collective action around driving impact improvements. Of course, you need the tools necessary to do that. You need high-resolution data, and we're happy to play a role in that. But that's my call to action, is really engage more deeply with your supply chain.
Thank you. And Andrea, final word?
Sure. Well, so my call to action is if you are working for a fashion company or a beauty company or any consumer product company here today, reach out to your local university or college and let them know if you need help and don't have the bandwidth, I could use help. All of these, and if you're in New York, reach out to me, but all of these colleges and universities have students who really don't want to sit and listen to stages on a stage, right? That type of education created a lot of the issues we're having globally right now. So having students do projects for you and helping you solve issues, I know has gotten students jobs. I know has created solutions for fashion brands, and it's also sometimes an impact reducer. So it's a win-win-win. And if you're an organization of any sort, also reach out. And because we are here to help. And it's really important in education that we educate to design, to produce, to package, to distribute, to sell, and to resell, like the world depends on it, because it does.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll have to leave it right here. So thank you for a wonderful conversation.